We move on now to our next session, the game changers and the future of digital India. The AV, please. Well, we have, like all of our other sessions, we've got some esteemed panelists joining us today. Let me introduce you to them. Harish Chawla is currently a partner at True North, one of India's most experienced and respected private equity funds, with over $3 billion under management. Chawla is one of the most influential commentators in the Indian digital space. His work on founding Fuel is considered the gold standard in thought leadership. He is adjunct faculty at the SPJ Institute of Management. He is best known, though, for his leadership in transforming the Network 18 group into a formidable media network. His career at Network 18 spanned 12 years, and he grew revenues from 3 million in 1999 to 500 million in 2012. Mr. Chawla has also been keenly engaged in the consumer internet revolution in India from the early 90s. He is credited with building India's largest, most well-known internet businesses like Money Control, Book My Show, Yatra, First Post, and Home Shop 18. He continues as a successful investor and mentor to several internet and consumer startups today. Harish holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from IIT Bombay and a master's degree in business management from IIM Calcutta. Please welcome Harish Chawla. Our next panelist, Ashish Hemrajani, is the founder and CEO of Big Tree Entertainment Private Limited, which operates Book My Show, India's leading online entertainment platform, offering tickets and end-to-end management for live events and movies. I know, I'm an actor. All of our tickets are on Book My Show. Ashish started his professional journey after completing his MBA specializing in marketing in 1997. Book My Show also gives back to the society through Book a Smile, the charity initiative of the organization. Since its inception, Book a Smile, through the power of ₹1, has positively impacted millions of lives across the country and continues to generate smiles within the lesser fortunate sections of the society. Ashish balance and sails every week and participates in sailing competitions regularly, along with his crew. Well, it's all smooth sailing for Ashish Hemrajani. Welcome. Vipul Parekh. Vipul is the co-founder and CMO of Big Basket and oversees the marketing and finance functions of the firm. As a seasoned senior executive with considerable experience in the IT, retail, e-commerce, and internet space, he has successfully built strong teams that deliver results, and strategic operations whose efforts span distribution channels, marketing and product management, and merchandising. Prior to Big Basket, Vipul was investment director at People Capital Advisors, a growth stage private equity firm. He received a postgraduate degree in management and marketing from the IIM Bangalore. Welcome. Vivek Sundar. Vivek Sundar has over 20 years of experience in the FMCG industry and has been working at the intersection of business and technology across several leadership roles and geographies. In his previous stint at P&G, Vivek held the position of managing director for P&G's East Africa operations, and his performance has been recognized by the global CEO. He is currently the first COO at Swiggy, where he is in charge of developing and executing Swiggy's strategic direction and priorities. He is also a Shutterbug and was the recipient of the Nat Geo Wildlife Photography Award. Please welcome Vivek Sundar. Thank you. Last but not least, we have our moderator for today, who's going to take us through, Vikas Jain. Vikas is the managing director and partner and leads Boston Consulting Group's technology, media, and telecom practice in India. He works extensively with technology, media, and next-gen digital players to help them shift their performance. He's also closely associated with NASSCOM and works with them on a range of industry initiatives. Prior to joining BCG, Vikas was a partner with Everest Group and a strategy consultant at Accenture. He started his career in the financial markets. Welcome. Welcome. Please take it away.
Thank you, Sujit. Just doing a quick audio check. If people can hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Suchitra, for the kind introductions, and welcome to my esteemed panelists. Folks, we have a very illustrious panel today afternoon. I call them real game changers. More so, Some of them have changed the way our pandemic has played out, and without them, it would have been an even harder experience than it has been already. People who have changed the paradigms in the space they've operated in using the power of digital and technology. This revolution is happening as we speak and has been accelerated by the events of the last 15 to 18 months all around us. Going forward, we all believe this has the potential to unlock significant economic value and be the basis for uplifting India into the next orbit as we harness this power over the next few years and decades. With this panel today, we will explore what are game-changing ideas, what leads one to them, what are the big ones around us that are either being developed, nurtured, or yet to be found. What will it take to scale these? And importantly, what will it take to take many of these ideas to Bharat and unlock what potential India has in the future? With this panelist, that's what we'll spend time on. And let me get this going very quickly. Vipul, let me start with you. You know, you've had a history of startups, tried many ideas. What leads one to land in game-changing ideas? How does one think about it? What brings you to that? Just hearing from you would be very interesting on that.
No, thanks, Vikash. That's a very interesting question. One of the things I've realized is game-changing ideas are never very apparent. I mean, when you look at them, they never seem to be game-changing. And let me relate this to my experience at least, and give you a little story about what we've gone through. This is probably a third startup. The first one bombed quite spectacularly, and it was backed by some of the smartest investors in the world, right? Reliance Industries, Chris Capital, which is one of the largest private equity and most successful firms in the country, and a bunch of us, and I think we would rate ourselves reasonably smart. And we started an online e-commerce business way back in '99. It was only about a decade early, right? And when I think back now, I realize that, you know, all 10 of us, I mean, the people who really were involved in setting this company up and the investors who got us started, we got it completely off. And when I look back when we started, we obviously thought it was a game-changing idea. And when I look back, I think the cardinal mistake we made was we did not think through the entire, what I call the external lookout. When you look at an idea, you need to evaluate it two ways. One, it's an idea which requires you to understand what's happening in the market and logically assess whether this idea will work. In our case, we thought, you know, people will love the internet. Yeah, this is dial-up days, mind you. And we thought millions of people will come online. We never realized this was broadband. This was not mobile internet. The government had to lay the wires. To lay a wire in India takes 10 permissions, which take 3 months. And so by the time you were actually to lay wires and connect 1 million Indians, it'll probably take a couple of decades. So that never went anywhere. And so when that happened, we actually pivoted and said, you know, we've been stupid. This doesn't work. Let's now, we still have some money in the bank. Let's figure out what can we do. And then we scanned the environment and said, you know, we have done this online retail. Let's go back to offline retail. So we were probably the only e-commerce startup in the world which went from online retail to offline retail. And we started setting up grocery stores. Because then we looked at the environment and said, you know, there are hardly any grocery chains. Everywhere else in the world, there are thousands of them. All large developed countries have large chains. So this is going to be an opportunity. And this idea really required us to look internally, saying, okay, do we have the skills? The market exists. Logically, this should happen. It might take longer. It might happen faster. But the only thing is, do we have the capability to really build an offline business? And we built it. It scaled and God willing, did well. And so when we went back to Big Basket and we had learned a lesson by then, we said, okay, we understand the e-commerce business. We know grocery is a large market. We know customers love to buy online. By the time Flipkart was already a very big brand, nobody in the world thought online grocery would work, and that too in India. Everybody said no. You know, the investors I met initially used to laugh and said, you really think Indians are going to buy grocery online? And this really required us to look internally and say, you know, can we actually build? We knew we could deliver this. This required us to actually look, externally and say, is there a large enough market? Do we think customers will move online? And our logic said, you know, they would. And so that's been the story. So the one thing I've learned is game-changing ideas are never very apparent. In hindsight, all the good ideas look game-changing. All the bad ideas seem like very stupid and nobody should have pursued them. But I think 3 things that I've learned. One, you need to look at the idea and decide whether you need to look internally or externally. Second, you need to check for user acceptance. You need to look for a product market fit. Are customers happy? In a first instance, customers are happy, but they were not delighted. Nobody was running to dial online and buy from fabmart.com. But when we started Big Basket, we couldn't fill demand fast enough. So do you have product market fit? And that's the second thing that you look for. And a third thing that we have learned is that good ideas are iterative. What you start with and what you may end up with are two very different things. And you may start with an idea which takes shape over a period of time, gets defined by your experience, by customer feedback, and then becomes what looks like a good idea 10 years later. Right?
Thanks, Vipul. And in fact, if I may add the fourth one on the 3 points you mentioned, it's also about acknowledging, and you call yourself stupid. So it's acknowledging that you may not be right. Either the timing is not right, the idea is not perfect. But I think, thank you for Vipul for that interesting journey in the story of what you've gone through. Harish, let me kind of come to you. You've been looking at ideas, you've been looking at startups for a very, very long time, and you continue to be at the forefront of what's going on. As you see what's going on around us, what are the big trends that you're seeing? What are the big digital trends that you think will change how businesses, industries will play out in India and outside as you think about India's future?
Yeah, thanks, Vikas. Just picking up from what Vipul talked about, I think, timing is everything. And I think we are at a seminal moment in India's history, actually. And the seeds of this were planted actually more than a decade ago, where we first started building the public digital rails. So there are 2-3 stories that actually have come together right now. So the one is that we built the whole India stack. We got mobile-enabled payments going. So that was going on in parallel. Then in 2016, with the entry of Jio, we saw how data costs went down by almost 97%. And that made the internet affordable to every Indian virtually. And today you'll find Indians first make sure their phone is charged before they have any other expense. And the third thing that happened is that COVID suddenly came along. And therefore, while the revolution that took place in 2016 actually made everybody, access a smartphone, they were still internet content consumers. They were not transacting on the internet. So people were watching entertainment, watching TV, watching OTT shows, but not really making payments, buying things, availing services on the internet. So I think when you combine these two things and with what COVID has done to us, so we are no longer in digital India, we're no longer in 2021. I think we've leapfrogged to 2025. And I think, other panelists will talk to you about how they've seen their businesses fundamentally shift. I think the entire profitability curves for these companies has transformed. The whole digital economy was actually pushing Indians to move digital over the last decade. I mean, we were seeing cashbacks, money being thrown in marketing to just get the user to adopt and move to the more frictionless digital environment. But it wasn't really sticking. So a lot of money, billions have been spent to really get the first 70, 80 million people onboarded. But right now, almost every Indian is now ready to transact online. And therefore that, I think, has become, I call it the push economy has become the pull economy. And that is a fundamentally new, let's say, paradigm that we are living in. And that's visible. We've had 12 unicorns get created in the last 4 months. So you're seeing, one after the other companies are becoming larger. They're growing profitably, which was always a question for a while now. And the consumer's willingness to pay has shown up. And they're willing to pay for convenience. They're willing to pay for control. They're willing to pay for access. So I think in that sense, we are completely in a new paradigm. The other thing, on the other end, this is within India. On the other end, what COVID has done, it's forced companies across the globe to go digital. And suddenly, it's like a Y2K moment. Imagine you're in 1999 and year 2000 is coming and all your computers are going to go out of whack. Similarly, I think the whole world now needs software development capabilities. And India sits with millions of engineers, large IT services firms, which can export software creating capabilities abroad. But equally, what's also happened with the pandemic is that Indian companies can now just not sell talent. They can also sell products. So we're seeing companies like Zoho, Freshdesk, Zenoti, Postman, a lot of Postman, yeah. So a lot of internet companies are now able to serve the globe because in a sense, India has moved ahead of even the West, actually. India and China are the mobile first economies of the world. We would develop for the smartphone first and then pull back to the desktop. And that capability is not available in the US. And we've learned how to do it at very low cost. We've learned how to bring transaction costs down. America continues to be a huge transaction cost economy. So I believe our cloud companies that built out of India will really challenge the Western companies both on cost and capability both, because they'll be mobile first, they'll be cheaper, they'll be more functional than what the West has created over the last 2 decades. So I think everything is looking fantastic, and I'm sure the other panelists will tell you more about it.
No, thanks, Harish. Very interesting themes coming there. Push versus pull, online consumption moving to online transaction, and that really creating the flow economy, which is now leading to all the second order benefits. And you also mentioned 70 to 80 million consumers have come on board and are willing to kind of engage and transact. Ashish, I can't see your image, but if you are still on the panel here, hi. When we spoke briefly, you had a very interesting way to look at India. And yeah, there is India in many parts, right? There is the top 2%, there's the next 5%, and then there's obviously the very large Bharat, which is still not fully touched by this revolution in a complete way. How do you think about this? How do you think about India in different parts? What are the ideas as you think about opportunities that one could take to really take this beyond the metros, the cities, and the creme de la creme in the next year?
Yeah, I have a very simplistic thing on how to handle complex problems. And I want to sort of oversimplify, and I'm sorry, and also a disclaimer, and picking up from your Harish left off. I'm only here to give gyan. We are doing no business right now. Book My Show makes no money, so I can only give gyan. We're not doing any business. So you can take what you like and you can, shove down the toilet what you don't. But the point I'm trying to make is that, I've been building Book My Show for 21 years, and we've only got started. And somebody else mentioned that they were way before their time. And I think we're in that same, bracket or category. I call the top sort of 2% of this country, or even smaller group of maybe about 20 million Indians as the London of India, which is rich, powerful, have all the means, the PPP like anywhere else in the world. And that's what everybody catered for. And then you've got the United Kingdom of India, 100 million Indians, English speaking, private medical care, private schooling, and the ones that could actually buy anything. And that's what at least Book My Show and a lot of some of the companies catered towards. Everybody ran after land grab, customer acquisition, came up with some cool metrics of LTV over CAC and all of that. But that market didn't really exist. But as Harish said, it's really only been the last couple of years where we are seeing this emergence of Brazil of India, which is 450 million Indians, who are now connected. There's democratization of information and removal of arbitrage of pricing purely on the basis of digitization. And this has largely been driven by Jio, obviously, because they brought the prices down, of connectivity by 90%, and there's this super highway. And it's this emerging middle class where I think there is a real new opportunity, backed by the fact that there is UPI, which I think is the biggest disruption the world has seen. And we don't celebrate it as much at scale that the world has seen. And then you've got the Africa of India. I don't want to be derogatory, but it's, they're marginalized, underserved, undernourished, which really get employed by the United Kingdom of India, which is 100 million Indians. And if you cannot draw from society, create value and give back and connect the 100 million to the 700 million, none of us will succeed. So the market today has moved dramatically, and there's been a quantum shift from that 2%, which is, or the 20 million to 100 million to 400 million. And there is a potential. And if we really want this to become another 700 million additional, which is getting to 1.2, 1.3 billion, it's the 100 million that need to make the effort. And it's beyond just profiteering and business, but to also sort of draw from society and give back and lift up before we can actually create that marketplace for ourselves. That's the simplistic, real view of an outside-in perspective, because otherwise you can keep getting complicated on socio-economic, 33 states, union territory, this language, this food. It'll boggle your mind, and you will have no job. So I just want to sort of break it down into 4 segments.
No, Ashish, that's a very interesting way to construct, and I think many people in this panel will echo to the fact that we had the 100 million covered, and we are beginning to touch part of the next 400, which is the Brazil of India. And the one that's somewhat untouched is still untouched, which is rural in the hinterlands. And Vivek, I want to come to you on that. As you think about I think as a business, you're beginning to touch a lot of the top 100, 200 million people, right? That's really where your deep business is. But as you think about the broader India, and sometimes I like to use the phrase India to Bharat, right? Which is hinterland, low economic power, distributed. Economics really don't work well as you think about businesses and the private entrepreneur, and the capitalist theory start to struggle. What are the ideas in terms of unlocking that part of India, in terms of leveraging digital, leveraging technology, and what ideas and opportunities exist to actually serve that part and bring them into the ecosystem in a far more integrated form, and then uplift that whole space that we think about future of India?
Cool. Thanks, Vikas, for having me, and thank you to the Rotarians. It would be remiss of me to not mention the fact that we've actually had a fantastic partnership with Rotary Mumbai. We've fed thousands of meals courtesy Rotary Mumbai to the underprivileged, especially during this pandemic. So thank you, Rotarians, for helping out. To the question which you asked, it's an interesting one. I mean, Ashish, of course, gave it in sort of continent or country contrasts, which is an interesting way to look at it. And I do think that there is many Indias within an India. That is true. There's no one monolith and so on and so forth. But I think there is an interesting thing that is there. And I'm sort of also struck by what Vipul talked about being a little ahead of the game back in the late 90s. Actually, it's during that time that I remember reading a book called Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which is there is an absolute fortune to be made at the bottom of the pyramid. Thinking about that group as economically unviable is a problem. You'll essentially just, if you try to force fit it, you're going to not succeed. But if you think about designing for them, then you will make money. And in my previous avatar, that was true. We used to actually make more money in so-called India 3 than we did in India 1. Most people make more money on the smaller sachets and stuff like that is sold, because essentially those are unpromoted. You don't need to worry about higher margins of trade and so on and so forth. So actually it ends up making a lot of money. And once you give a good product to that consumer, they tend to be more loyal than, let's say, the finicky urban consumer. So I don't think that the challenges of Bharat are that about not making money. It's about creativity and thinking about unlocking both a cost side problem as well as a demand side problem. So, and those who are able to do that will make money. And just proof of that, we don't obviously go to full Bharat yet. We're probably going to, the 150 million Indians population right now. And it's funny we don't make less money in the small cities versus the big cities. I just wanted to say that we don't have a standard pyramid that is there that, you ought to make a lot of money at the top and you make very little money at the bottom. It's not true. While the consumer is not used to paying that much in small town India, they tend to have two things that are not true in large India. One, there are almost no single occupying households, unlike in big urban towns, right? Single or double. So your order sizes are big because the average number of people that are placing an order is much greater. And secondly, the costs that we have in terms of how much we're able to get the delivery boys and girls for is obviously proportionally lower. So while there is a certain depression that is there in terms of the revenue, it is more than made up by the fact that there is volumes and that there is lower cost. They're also no more discount sensitive. They're value sensitive, but no more discount sensitive than the urban sort of metro Indian population. So we have therefore, through the pandemic, have had no economic reason to shut down a single one of the 550 cities that are in operation, because we make money everywhere. So why should you shut it down, and why should you constrain, and why should you say, oh, there is a pandemic, let's sort of constrain ourselves? And I think that if you think this is just one example, but I do think that there is money to be made if we look at the problem statements and the issues that they have and how can technology solve them. So think a little bit about Bharat, and if you define Bharat as the ultimate rural India, today they physically have to come to a city for many things: education, sometimes shopping, healthcare, business, maybe to trade. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why they need to be connected to the cities. Now, the pandemic has taught us, and technology has taught us, that you don't necessarily need to come to the cities to do many of these things. There is no reason why you can't have meaningful telemedicine provided to the villages of India if you basically invest in the right kind of infrastructure on both ends. There is no reason why they need to come to a city to buy stuff, because they can, of course, e-shop. If you teach them how to e-shop and basically give it to them, the UI, UX, and the proposition is making sense for them. There is also no reason for them to send their kids and split their families and sort of send their kids to a large town for education, because they can sit and get educated if they want. So almost all the reasons why somebody would want to either temporarily or permanently migrate to big towns is gone, or can go if we can imagine it. I think the question is, if individual companies start imagining it, I don't think it'll happen, because it's just not going to be worth it for every company to lay their own pipelines, as it were. But if we think a little bit about the fact that there is a whole bunch of services that can be there, and a superhighway, in this case an information superhighway, can be there between the cities and the villages, a lot of services can ride on that, and then it makes sense for people to ride that. And I do think that if that were to happen, then truly digital transformation in Bharat would be something we'll be talking about in a few years from now.
Thanks, Vivek. That's a pretty interesting set of ideas. One, value in the bottom of the pyramid. B, economics are positive and sometimes better. C, the opportunities is to kind of bring the services to them versus to get them to move to obtain services and products. And lastly, the whole need of a shared infrastructure, digital and or otherwise, that will be the source of unlock. So just taking with some of those ideas. But you mentioned something about how companies need to think. And Ashish, I want to go back to our conversation where you talked about the DNA of companies to solve problems. How do you then pick these ideas and then you kind of think about applying it to the bigger scale? Just talk to the group about what is it that a company should be thinking of ideas and problem solving, and how do you describe that DNA that is required to kind of actually capture these opportunities that are being talked about?
It's a very pertinent question. I just think that it needs to be more cultural. It has to be within when you say DNA, it has to be cultural and within every person within the organization, and where you need to celebrate ideas. I think the challenge today is that everybody has a great idea. When you're sitting on a pot in the morning, reading a newspaper, you're having a shower, everybody has great ideas. You're swimming somewhere, you're having a meal, an idea pops in. But I think the one thing that people don't think about is how do you execute those ideas and what is the execution strategy? But while you're thinking about the execution, you surround yourself with many people who will tell you why that idea shouldn't work. And if your gut tells you within the first 5 seconds that it's a great idea, you've got to surround yourself with people who have a solutions mindset to say, great thought, great idea, let's celebrate it. How do you now try to make it work? And if it doesn't end up working in its natural transition or progression, then it's okay. But if you've got 20 people around you who are analyzing things and telling you why it's not a great idea, you're actually killing innovation. You're killing the entire cultural DNA of that organization. And you will, at some point of time, whether it's a month, whether it's 2 years, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, perish. And you would see, it's that boiling frog theory. When the water is boiling hot and you put a frog in it, it'll hop out. But if it's on simmer, over a period of time, the guy's going to end up dead anyways. And it's this sort of culture that you breed within your company, which will slowly but surely kill the organization. And there are enough, Fortune 500 companies, and you see how radically things have changed. And that's one of the things. I don't know if you've ever read this book, and I remember it. I'm just trying to draw an analogy. It wasn't in context to this conversation, but Good to Great, which differentiates good companies from great companies. And there were a set of parameters which were great at that point of time. I think one of the parameters that you would see on the organizations that have created enormous scale and value over the last maybe 5 or 10 years has been the culture of innovation. And that needs to be bred from not overthinking it and having that 5-second thought in your head to say, phenomenal idea, now let's try and make it work. And surround and rally yourself around people who will try to make it work, and then, try and get the idea to fruition. And then finally, of course, it's execution. And I think that's one of the things that I said it, and it got picked up, I think, by Sanjeev the other day, and it was doing the social media on us being cockroaches, right? Book My Show or Ashish being a cockroach and not a unicorn. because we are survivors. And I think it's not so much about survival, but it's about constantly innovating on ideas and celebrating. And it's not, and and they don't belong to anybody in the organization. It's a part of the culture. And I think that's the only point that I was trying to allude to when I made that cockroach comment.
No, I'm going to take a very, very interesting phrases from this session today. Cockroach versus a unicorn. Thanks for that, Ashish. And you talked about innovation. You talked about the power ideas. Vipul, let me pull you in. And you had mentioned entrepreneurship. Now, all businesses. India has been a land of entrepreneurs.
Right.
In the world today, we make it sound different. It's digital. It's startup. But every time it's been about small and big businesses doing something, right? And there are entrepreneurs around. And you talked about just unleashing entrepreneurship as a critical ingredient to unlock what India can do.
Right.
Just share your thoughts on that, Vipul, as you kind of build on the ideas and the opportunities around us. What are
I have some radical and probably completely harebrained thoughts. And let's hope for once I'm not being stupid. But one of the things that's always intrigued me, we are a country of immense potential. I was speaking to a startup just yesterday, which is based in Indore, has built a $100 million business over the last 5 years with practically very little investment. Bunch of guys, young chaps, early 20s, and really scale. And you can see the energy, you can see the passion. And every city that I'm telling you that you can go to in India, every small town, every city, there are people like that. And one of the things that's been intriguing me is, why doesn't this collective energy get unleashed? Why are we not able to create enough opportunities to really set this free? And how do we actually create a mechanism to do so? And one thought which struck me was, if there was some way we could actually create 10,000 startups a year in India, right? We would actually create a significant momentum behind the entire economy. You'd unleash millions of job opportunities. We would create a very high positive cycle. And we would solve a lot of problems which we keep thinking the government has to solve. They'll all get solved by entrepreneurs in some form or the other, at a fraction of the cost that the government would solve. And that's my belief. So how do you get to this 10,000 startups? And I was thinking about it. When we started Big Basket, we spent about, and we were reasonably well off because we were on a third startup by then. And so we spent about $200,000 to get Big Basket started. And I was thinking, what does it really take? What is the investment that is required per startup if you're feeling very generous to get the startups going? And my guess is about $100,000. So even if you do 10,000 startups in India, let's assume I give $100,000 to 10,000 startups, is $1 billion, which is a penny in the, which is a drop in the ocean for the government. And there is enough. Forget about the government. There is enough long-term social ESG capital available in the world, where if you package this idea and present it well, there is no reason the government should be able to actually just get external capital to do this, not even internal. And therefore, if you can get this going, you invest this $1 billion and you get 10,000 startups going, and you look at whatever hit rate you want to look at the venture capital hit rates, look at the private equity hit rates, and do your math. To give you one example, NASSCOM did this 10,000 startups. They've actually incubated about 5,000 startups over the last 6 years, and about 1,000 have got funded, right? Which is a very high strike rate. Take half of that strike rate. Take maybe a quarter of the strike rate. And the math works out so brilliantly, just in terms of taxes paid, in terms of employment generated, in terms of external funding that the country will receive, in terms of the boost to the local economy it will create. It just makes a significant difference. But one caveat, don't do it in the large cities. These 10,000 startups can't come from the top 25 cities of the country. Just ban them. And then watch what it does. You will ease migration issues, you will solve local problems, you will create employment locally in all the towns that we have. And there are enough people to take up this challenge. We have absolutely no dearth of talent and potential in our country to get this done.
Very interesting.
So sorry, that was a quite left afield, but
very
just
real.
A thought to just say.
As always, borne out by numbers and makes it very real and practical. And let me build on that. And Vivek, just your quick thoughts. And we're running a bit tight on time, but as you think about what Vipul just talked about, going beyond cities, and you talked about shared infrastructure, shared digital infrastructure. What are the roles of the different stakeholders in the ecosystem that you need to see playing as you take to what Ashish described, the power of digital technology to Bharat, to the Africa of India, beyond the India, London, UK, and Brazil of India? Just any quick thoughts there?
So before I sort of answer your question, let me just take on the point which Vipul was making. Completely agree with the thought of going into small town India. We actually had, when we were expanding our own business, we wanted to know how many employees hometowns will be opening as we open into our cities. So we actually did a poll of the employees and said, here are the list of cities we're opening. Is your hometown represented? And we had employees from 261 towns. And these are not people whose origins are there. These are people who grew up there in the country. So there is a lot of, and all of them have come to a startup, right? I mean, early stage startup back then when we started this. So there is a lot of entrepreneurial fire that's there. When I used to visit the cities, there's a lot of desire to do stuff. I think there's just not enough. The ecosystem isn't there. So if we have an ecosystem, finance is, I think, the smallest problem. Eventually, it can be found. So I would echo what Vipul was saying. To the point which you were asking about, what is the role? Let's just sort of get the role of the government out of the way, because I think that is important. I think it's clear that a lot of the financial sort of plumbing, if it was done in terms of, Aadhaar did a fair bit of stuff to enable the sort of Chandan Aadhaar money sort of combination. So I think if they can just lay the infrastructure, and I don't necessarily here, I'm not referring to pipes. I'm not referring to a connection from a town to a city. I'm just referring to the fact that they lay the policy framework, they lay the employment framework, and they lay the framework for all of these sort of rural businesses or rural people to connect to the cities, or to not have to come to the cities, and therefore not just get education, health, etc., but eventually even start their businesses from there. Their job is to make sure that they lay what is called the frameworks of the infrastructure. There are enough people who can then lay the physical infrastructure that's needed, be it in fiber optic or roads or stuff like that. Because once you basically lay that out and there is long-term money to be made, there will be people who will come in and lay the frameworks, and then the individual players will go in and deliver the services. Today, I can't deliver rural. I'm sure Big Basket doesn't deliver much rural, because it's not worth it for Big Basket to take the product and take it back to rural. I mean, many people will even ask, what's Big Basket doing back in rural? This product just left rural some time ago. Why is it coming back? That may be a separate problem. But the fact of the matter is that the individual companies can't take an individual product. But if we had a system where there was a truck which was essentially carrying a bunch of grocery stuff, a bunch of let's say food, medicines, a whole bunch of stuff, and that is the truck that was going into that rural market, the scale comes in and it can basically be then provided, and different companies can then hop onto it. There is absolutely no benefit it's the same problem of us having shoddy public transport, so everybody has to buy cars, and then the cities get clogged up. If there was great public transportation in the cities, very few people will need to buy bikes and cars and stuff like that. So I think the government's role is to basically lay the frameworks and not be sort of ambiguous. And then we should probably then have private entrepreneurs and large companies making merry. I agree with Vipul. There is enough and more that can be done by private companies. The government doesn't need to actually physically do that. I do think that that's the only thing that's required, and then the rest will follow.
Thanks, Vivek. I think interesting point in terms of government limiting its role to setting the environment and making it enabling, but not necessarily going all the way to actually doing it themselves. Right? So I think that's a very interesting call out that you made. But Harish, and maybe this is my last question for this session. Harish, you've been looking at this for a long time. You have a forward-looking view. As you think about the future of digital India, what are your thoughts? I mean, you talked about multiple things. You talked about pandemic really being the point of inflection. Decade ago, we set the infrastructure with Aadhaar, then with UPI, the full India stack. We are now building the health stack. In fact, BCG is closely involved with that. And there are different stacks that are being talked about as they all come together to unlock that. How do you see all of this playing out? And if you were to just take a point over the next decade in terms of the digital India?
Yeah, so thanks. So the way I look at it is that what this whole ecosystem coming together will do is actually release credit into the system. And I don't think capital is a problem at all. There are billions of dollars flowing in almost every month into this ecosystem. I think we have to look for the opportunity. The opportunity, I think, lies in two things. One is pre-pandemic, we talked about made in India. We need to get manufacturing back to India. But manufacturing is a messy affair. Just try and set up a plant. You need some 350 permissions to get it off the ground. And then you have to continuously engage with a myriad of policies and checks and officers and excise and GST, everything. Now, post-pandemic, I think the quicker we move to the fact that the whole world needs coders, Indians are good at math. Indians, engineers are millions are unemployed today. Indians have millions of unemployed BCom graduates. There is a case to actually code in India. And that, I think we need coders in India itself. Ask any startup here how difficult it is to hire a coder today and hire a good software engineer. Software engineer coder salaries have on average jumped double over the pandemic year actually. So there's a huge surge in demand, both in India and globally. We need to fix the supply lines. So the government needs to get in there, redo our education policy, redo our vocational incentives that we give people, and get the coders ready. The second, let's say, vector is the fact is that India has very low women participating in the workforce. And coding can fix that. So She Can Code in India is the second initiative to pick up. Because now women can stay in their home, in their small towns, in the villages, and get a job working at Microsoft or Google or Amazon or Flipkart or Swiggy or Big Basket from their village and do an equally good job as a man sitting anywhere in the office now. So I think that whole opening up of the world that you can sit and code for any company anywhere in the world and can learn on the job. Because remember, all you need to do to get coding started is need to get the basics right. And then the companies, because the field is new, are actually training people. When you look at the history of Infosys, TCS, it's not as if they had some ready crop of software engineers waiting. They almost get fresh raw engineers in and sit and train them through the processes and train them to become great software engineers. I think every startup is now learning that they have to do that in India. Everybody is hiring an intern and slowly trying to convert them into a full stack engineer over a few years. The great value unleashing will happen in this whole idea that all the incentives that we had for Made in India, if you can just switch gears, put it in Code in India and put it in Girls Code in India, I think that will be a big, let's say, it'll transform our economy completely over the next decade.
Thanks, Harish. Thanks, Harish. This is interesting. Code in India and She Can Code. At least those are the two phrases I'm taking away. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for a very wonderful session. It was a Sunday, but the afternoon was worth it. Appreciate your sharing your thoughts. It's a very rich set of ideas. And I will tell you, I'm carrying away lots of interesting phrases about how to think about India, how to articulate ideas. Thanks a lot for your time. And Rotary, thanks for the opportunity.